The Galactic Forum was a vast expanse of tiered seating, packed with representatives from every corner of the galaxy. The hall stretched so far that, from the center, it felt like the eyes of the universe were upon you. The lighting was dim, casting a cold blue hue over the entire chamber, giving it an almost clinical atmosphere. Delegates, each of a different species, sat in rows, their voices echoing in the vast room, murmuring, arguing, and shouting in their native tongues, tones, clicks, and pulses merging into a chaotic symphony. Their debates reverberated through translation spheres, translating every word with precision. At the heart of this tumult stood King Harker of the Trex Dominion, the towering reptilian warlord whose very presence demanded attention. His voice broke through the noise, booming with authority. "You will surrender Earth's orbital defenses," Harker commanded, his breath steaming in the artificially chilled atmosphere of the station. The anger in his voice was clear, seething beneath his words. "You will pay reparations for the moon we lost, or you will burn." Behind him, a wall of Trex soldiers, their bodies encased in pitch black, obsidian armor, stood in stoic silence. Their eyes, cold, calculating, and menacing, scanned the room, daring anyone to challenge their king. The Trace were not here to negotiate. They were here to dictate. The room fell silent for a moment, the tension thickening in the air. Even the translation orbs seemed to hesitate, uncertain of how to convey the sheer arrogance of Harker's demand. Harker stood on his elevated platform, his clawed limbs resting on the sides of the throne, towering over the forum. His expression was one of cold, calculated menace. Then, from one of the other delegations, the Vari, a species known for their methodical and calm demeanor, stood. A representative, an older male with aquamarine skin and deep-set eyes, leaned forward and spoke in his slow, deliberate tone. "With respect, King Harker," the Vari delegate said, "the investigation into the moon's destruction is still ongoing. There's no evidence linking Earth to the incident. We cannot proceed based on assumption alone." Harker's lips curled into a sneer, and he let out a low, dismissive laugh. "Earth gains the most," he growled. "It is always Earth scheming, whispering in the shadows." Another delegate, an insectoid species with chitinous armor and multifaceted eyes, clicked its mandibles in agitation. "You would start a war based on assumption?" it asked, the translation orbs buzzing with the sharpness of its words. "I do not assume," Harker snarled. "I decide." The room stirred again, the murmurs growing louder. This was no longer a debate, it was an ultimatum. The threat hung in the air like a blade poised above Earth's neck. The delegates shifted uneasily, some glancing at their translators, others exchanging nervous glances. But there was one seat still conspicuously empty, Earth. The doors to the hall opened with a soft hum, breaking the tension. A single figure entered the room, unarmed, unescorted. His footsteps were calm, measured, and steady as he walked toward the center. The delegates turned their gaze toward the human representative, eyes wide with surprise. Elias Voss was not the typical diplomat. He wore a simple, tailored black suit, unadorned by the usual garb of political negotiators. His face was impassive, unreadable, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp with focus. At his side, a narrow satchel rested, more symbolic than functional. "Who is that?" whispered a delegate, a low murmur rising through the crowd. Without acknowledging the question, Elias moved toward the central podium. He stopped there, turning to face the room full of alien representatives, his presence radiating calm, unshaken by the weight of the situation. "I am Earth's response," Elias said, his voice carrying clear and firm through the silence. There was no fanfare, no grand speeches, just the stark weight of his declaration. King Harker's gaze locked on the human diplomat. His expression twisted into a snarl, and his voice boomed once more. "This is an insult." Elias didn't blink, his posture as composed as ever. "You wanted a diplomat. You received one," he said, his words measured, deliberate, and calm. Harker's eyes narrowed, disbelief flashing across his features. "You think one man can stand against my entire dominion?" His voice was tinged with mockery, but Elias only stared back at him, unwavering. "No," Elias replied, his voice steady. I think only one is necessary. The room held its breath. Harker's sneer faltered, his eyes narrowing as he processed the boldness of the human's words. Elias was no typical diplomat. The way he spoke, without fear, without hesitation, disturbed the Trek's king more than any threat or challenge could. His confidence was unnerving. And it was not lost on the other delegates, who watched in silence. Another voice, the soft, aquatic delegate from a distant star system, rose in curiosity. Do you speak for Earth's military council? I speak for Earth, Elias replied with finality. Fully and officially. The murmur of the forum grew louder, the implications of his statement starting to sink in. Elias Voss was no mere representative, no diplomat sent to bow and plead for peace. He was Earth's voice, standing here in this hostile chamber, fully prepared to face whatever came. A voice interrupted the silence, the skepticism hanging in the air. And you bring no documents, no terms? Another delegate asked. Elias raised his hand slightly, gesturing for silence. Earth does not submit terms under threat. Nor do we play theatrics with ultimatums. Harker's anger boiled over, his eyes blazing with fury. You insult me in my presence, he growled, his voice like thunder. Elias stared up at him, his voice still calm, but with a chilling edge. You declared war before sending a question. You erased a trade agreement without discussion. You sent warships toward neutral zones. I've come not to debate, but to deliver our stance. The room grew quiet again. The delegates looked to one another, their faces etched with concern. Harker, however, stood tall, furious, but in control. Your stance is irrelevant, he snapped. Elias's voice didn't rise, his words steady and firm. Then why are you listening? For a moment, everything seemed to still. Even the translation orbs faltered in their duties, processing the gravity of the exchange. Harker's massive form towered above the human, but it was clear that this was not going as he had expected. The younger races, the less powerful factions in the room, leaned forward. They watched in awe as one human stood alone, unbowed, in the face of a galactic warlord. Elias turned to face the entire assembly. His voice echoed through the chamber as he declared Earth's stance. Earth neither seeks war nor fears it. We value peace, but not above dignity. If the Treks demand war, Earth will respond decisively, permanently. The room stirred again, but this time, the murmurs were less about disbelief and more about intrigue. The Vari ambassador shifted nervously in his seat. The insectoid delegate clicked his mandibles in thought. Harker growled. You threaten me, human. I clarify, Elias replied. You mistake humanity's patience for weakness. A long silence followed, and then the tension broke, with the forum buzzing to life. Some delegates whispered to one another, their words lost in the cacophony of voices. Elias stood tall, unflinching, knowing what was to come. The Hall of Voices was eerily quiet the following day, as the delegates gathered early, their minds racing over what they had witnessed. The tension hung thick in the air, like an impending storm. The Trek's Dominion had not expected Elias Voss to be so resolute. His words had shattered their assumptions, and now the galaxy was watching, waiting, to see what humanity would do next. King Harker's towering form loomed on the raised dais, the Trace warlord exuding an air of invulnerability. He had long since dismissed Earth's demands as inconsequential. His warships were already en route, preparing to strike the vulnerable human colonies. And yet, the human diplomat, Elias Voss, had not reacted with fear. Instead, he had responded with something far worse: silence. Harker's patience had worn thin, but he had underestimated one crucial detail. Elias was not here to negotiate. He was here to end the conversation before it even started. The Trek's king's eyes narrowed as the delegates filled the seats, their murmurs and whispers flowing like a ripple across the forum. Harker's soldiers stood at attention behind him, a wall of unyielding muscle and cold steel. His claws twitched in anticipation, eager to end the farce that Earth had brought to their doorstep. It was clear now, Earth had no intention of submitting to threats. At the base of the dais, Elias stood once again, his presence quiet, unassuming. His black suit was the only sign of distinction as he moved through the forum. He had become the center of attention, not because of his size or power, but because of his confidence. The human diplomat had shown the galaxy something they hadn't expected, the strength of unwavering resolve. He stepped forward, his voice clear and calm as he addressed the room. "Yesterday, I delivered Earth's stance," Elias said, his tone cool but firm. "Today, I come to deliver the truth." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The voice of one man was louder than the collective roar of the Trex army. Elias's words carried weight, too much weight for some to bear. The Trex, the largest and most powerful empire in the galaxy, were suddenly unsure. How could this fragile human, standing alone, hold so much power in his silence? King Harker snarled, his patience exhausted. "You speak of truth, human. But truth does not win wars. Power does. The truth is you cannot win. You will submit, or you will be crushed." Elias raised an eyebrow but did not reply immediately. His expression remained unreadable, unfazed by Harker's fury. His eyes, cold and calculating, met the king's with a strange mix of disdain and indifference. He was not here to argue. He was not here to beg for mercy. "I've heard you," Elias finally said, his words slow and deliberate. "And you're wrong." The king's eyes flashed with rage, but Elias did not flinch. "You believe the Trace have power over all others, but the truth is, power doesn't lie in weapons, warships, or sheer strength. Power lies in choice. The ability to decide when to fight and when to stand still." Harker's anger surged. He stood, his claws scraping against the platform as he roared. "You dare!" But Elias cut him off with a single, cold statement. "I dare everything." The forum murmured again, some uneasy, others curious. The exchange between Elias and Harker had escalated quickly. Yet, the human remained calm, standing still with an air of finality, as if he had already decided the outcome of this meeting. A few smaller species in the audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what was happening. Others watched closely, intrigued. "What do you mean by that?" the Vari delegate asked cautiously, his voice echoing through the chamber. Elias turned to face him, his expression unchanging. "I mean that you believe war is inevitable, but you haven't yet seen that there are those who can end it before it begins." The Vari delegate looked at Elias in confusion, but the room was already beginning to buzz with energy. The other delegates, sensing something was coming, leaned forward in anticipation. Elias's voice dropped slightly as he continued. "I speak for Earth. And today, I do not speak in terms of diplomacy. I speak in terms of clarity." His eyes locked on Harker once more. "This ends now." A slight shift in his stance sent a subtle tremor through the room. The Trex king, who had once commanded fear from every species, now felt an unfamiliar sensation, doubt. Elias was not only standing firm, he was standing alone, and in doing so, he held all the power in this room. "Enough," Elias said. His voice had become cold, unwavering. "We've heard your demands, and we've delivered our response. There is no more to say." Harker's fists clenched. "You think you can dismiss me with words? With silence?" "Yes," Elias replied simply. The Trex king's eyes flashed with violent fury, his body bristling with energy. The forum tensed, sensing the coming explosion of rage. But Elias remained still. "I've come to speak one last time," Elias said. "Not as a diplomat. Not as a negotiator. But as a reminder." Harker's lips peeled back in a snarl, the low growl rumbling in his chest. He leaned forward from his platform, his voice a hiss. "You will learn to regret this, human. You will pay for your insolence." "I doubt it," Elias said, unbothered. "I've already won." The forum gasped, and for the first time, Harker paused, taken aback by the human's calm assertion. The king's gaze flickered across the room, searching for any sign of weakness in Elias's unwavering stance. The moment stretched on, thick with the tension of the impending war that was already hanging in the air. Later, in the shadows of the forum's private chambers, Elias stood before a wall of data, the holographic projections of military movements, fleet strategies, and intercepted communications flashing before him. Earth's warships, while not yet mobilized, were ready for the command to move out. In a hidden sector, protocol systems stirred to life. It was all coordinated in silence, just as Elias had planned. His fingers hovered over the interface, hesitating before making the final call. He did not need to win with brute force. He needed to make the galaxy understand. His mission had never been about starting a war. It was about ending one before it began. The soft chime of the door brought Elias back to reality. He turned to see Cameron, Earth's ambassador, enter the room. Her face was drawn, anxiety clear in her eyes. "You think this will work?" she asked quietly, her voice tight with concern. "Harker has already sent his fleets. You're talking about ending a war, but there's no time for diplomacy." Elias's gaze was calm, unwavering. "Time isn't the issue, Cameron. We're not trying to stop him. We're trying to make him irrelevant." She looked at him, understanding dawning. "You're not planning to talk to him again, are you?" Elias shook his head slowly. "There's no need. The conversation is over." The air in Covenant Station was thick with unease, and the hum of the station's countless systems filled the silence like a distant, undisturbed heartbeat. The delegates had gathered in the Hall of Voices once again, but this time, the atmosphere was different. The tension was palpable. The deadline had arrived. War was imminent, or so they believed. King Harker stood in his customary place, the Trex King's war throne perched high above the assembly floor. His massive form was draped in the ceremonial crimson and obsidian armor of his people, each plate glinting in the artificial light. His eyes, glowing with fury, scanned the room as he awaited the human diplomat. The Trex Dominion had made its demands clear, and now they were ready for the final step. Warships had already begun their approach to Earth's colonies, their engines throbbing in the deep void of space. But this time, there was no Earth representative in sight. Elias Voss was nowhere to be seen. The murmurs in the room grew louder as the delegates shifted uneasily in their seats. The Trex delegates exchanged tense glances, whispering among themselves. What had happened? Where was the human? Harker's claws drummed against the armrest of his throne in impatience. "Send for him," he demanded, his voice booming across the hall. Just then, the doors at the back of the hall slid open. Elias Voss entered. His attire was unchanged, the simple black suit, the satchel at his side, and the same unreadable expression on his face. No guards, no fanfare. He walked slowly, each step deliberate, as if time itself bent to his will. The room went silent once more. Elias moved to the center of the forum, standing tall before the assembly, his presence once again cutting through the tension like a blade. The Trex King's eyes narrowed in fury, but there was something different now. The confidence that had once radiated from his every word began to falter as he stared down at the human. "You are late," Harker growled, his voice dripping with contempt. "You had your chance, human. Now we take what we are owed." Elias's gaze met Harker's, unwavering, unflinching. His tone was cold, almost clinical. "I'm not here to discuss your demands any longer, Harker. You've had your time." The room was still. Every eye was on the human, and for a moment, Harker's roar of rage caught in his throat. He had expected defiance, but not like this. Elias's presence was not just defiance, it was a challenge. A silent declaration that the war had already ended, not with armies, but with one man. Harker's fists clenched. "You insolent fool!" he spat. "Do you think you can stop me? You think your words can change the course of this war?" Elias said nothing. He stood still, silent, his eyes piercing Harker's like an unspoken verdict. "I am the king of the Trex Dominion!" Harker bellowed, rising from his throne, his tail slamming against the floor. "And you will regret this insolence!" The Trex soldiers around him stiffened, but Elias did not move. Silence stretched between them, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of meaning. Full of purpose. The king stepped down from his throne, his massive form towering over Elias. The other delegates leaned forward in anticipation. Was this it? Was this the moment where the human finally broke? But Elias simply looked up unfazed. His calm was unbroken, like a still lake that would not ripple no matter how hard the wind blew. Harker's eyes narrowed to slits. You think you can face me like this? Alone, unarmed, in the face of the most powerful army in the galaxy? No, Elias said quietly. I don't think I can face you. But I know you've already lost. Before Harker could respond, Elias made his move. With a subtle shift of his foot, Elias bent slightly, his hand brushing against the satchel at his side. There was no grand flourish, no warning. Just a single motion. The blade, small, deadly, and invisible to scans, slid into his hand with expert precision. A microblade, body temperature regulated, its tungsten edge gleaming with cold malice. Harker's eyes widened as he saw the movement, but it was already too late. In one swift motion, Elias surged upward, his hand a blur of motion. The microblade pierced beneath Harker's jawline, and before the king could even let out a scream, the blade had cut through the brain stem, exiting through the crown of his skull with a soft whisper of blood. Harker's massive form collapsed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The throne room fell deathly silent. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then the chaos began. The Trek soldiers, frozen in place, finally reacted. But they did not rush toward Elias. They didn't know what to do. The leader of their empire, the king, had just been assassinated by one unarmed human. The fear that had once coursed through their veins was now replaced by something else, uncertainty. Elias didn't retreat. He didn't flee. He simply lowered the blade, covered in the blood of the Trek's king, and pressed a small device on his satchel. A hologram flickered to life above him, Earth's Secretary General, her image floating in the air, the voice clear and firm. This is not an act of war. This is the removal of a tyrant who declared one without provocation. The hologram echoed through the hall. Earth will not tolerate demands made under threat. We will not bend to fear. Let this moment serve as a warning. Humanity does not bluff. Humanity does not kneel. Humanity ends threats. The room stood still, as the weight of the message settled over everyone. Elias looked down at Harker's fallen body, the Trek's king's crown now nothing more than a symbol of shattered arrogance. Without a word, he stepped over the corpse, his blood-stained blade still in hand. He placed the blade atop the fallen king's throne, a silent symbol of humanity's final message. He turned to face the stunned assembly. Is there any further demand Earth needs to answer? Elias's voice rang out, the room still as a tomb. Not a single voice answered. Later, in the shadows of the station, Cameron found Elias in a quiet corridor, his expression unreadable. His steps were slow, purposeful, like a man who had long known what he had to do. You killed him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias didn't stop. He declared war first. I ended it before it began. You can't, she started, but Elias cut her off with a single glance. I can, he replied. And I just did. Her eyes searched his face for any sign of doubt, any sign of hesitation. But there was nothing. Do you regret it? She asked. Elias paused for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the stars outside the station's viewport. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. If I had waited, millions would have died. There's no regret in prevention, only cost. The Hall of Voices, once a battleground for words and threats, now lay in an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the soft hum of the station's artificial life support systems. Delegates sat frozen in their seats, their minds trying to comprehend the events that had just unfolded before them. King Harker was dead. The Trek's dominion had lost its most powerful leader in an instant, felled by the hand of a single, unarmed human diplomat. There were no grand speeches, no declaration of victory, only the cold, efficient strike of a blade. A message had been delivered, one that reverberated throughout the galaxy, shattering the facade of invincibility that the Trace had worn for centuries. The Trex delegation, still in shock, had not moved from their seats, paralyzed by the sheer scale of what had just occurred. Their king was gone, and with him, the certainty of their empire's dominance. They had come here to intimidate, to demand, and to destroy. Now they were left with nothing but a dead king and an uncertain future. The other species in the room remained as still as statues. Some of them, the younger races, looked at each other with wide, fearful eyes, while others, older and wiser, seemed to understand that the galaxy had shifted irrevocably. A new order was being born, and humanity had just marked its place in the stars. Elias Voss stood over the body of King Harker, his eyes never leaving the fallen warlord's form. The blade, still stained with the king's blood, gleamed under the artificial lights. Elias didn't flinch, didn't wipe the blood off his hands, nor did he make any attempt to justify his actions. He had done what was necessary. He had removed the threat. "You've done it, Elias." The voice of Cameron, Earth's ambassador, broke the silence, echoing through the chamber. Her voice was low, full of awe and concern. She approached him cautiously, her footsteps hesitant as she reached his side. Her face, usually calm and composed, was now a reflection of the gravity of what had happened. Elias didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at the body of the Trex king. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of the blade, and for a moment, he seemed to contemplate the cost of what he had just done. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. "The war was already on its way. It was only a matter of when." Cameron shook her head. "You killed him in front of everyone. A king, Elias. You didn't just take his life, you took the Dominion's heart. The galaxy will never see things the same way again." Elias turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "They won't forget this. The galaxy will remember this moment, and it will remember that Earth is not to be threatened." The galaxy reacts? Word of Harker's assassination spread faster than the speed of light. The news waves traveled through the galactic channels, bouncing from one system to the next, reaching every corner of known space. At first, there was disbelief. How could a single human diplomat have done what whole armies could not? The Trex Dominion, once the most fearsome empire in the galaxy, was now fractured. With no leader, no clear direction, and no cohesive military force, the once mighty warlord race was in disarray. The repercussions were immediate, but the true consequences were yet to be seen. The Forum was locked in a state of turmoil. No one knew what to do. King Harker's death had not only shattered the Trex's leadership, but had also thrown the entire galactic power structure into chaos. The Trex Dominion, unable to respond decisively, was left vulnerable, its empire now a collection of splintered factions. Many delegates in the Hall of Voices had been silent witnesses, but others were now actively debating the ramifications. The Vari, who had remained neutral until this point, saw an opportunity to broker peace and alliances where once war had seemed inevitable. The insectoid species, who had been on the brink of conflict with the Trex, now debated whether they should seize the moment to expand their influence. In the background, smaller empires and independent colonies began to assert their autonomy. Some declared independence from the Trex Dominion, their leaders emboldened by the collapse of the once unstoppable force. A few, more cautious, chose to wait and see how Earth would react to the sudden power vacuum. And then there were the whispers. Some feared that Elias's actions would lead to further chaos. Others, however, saw him as a savior, a man who had single-handedly ended a war before it could begin. Elias's decision. Back in the private chambers of Earth's delegation, Elias sat alone in front of a massive holomap, staring at the blinking lights of the fleet formations that had been gathered on the edge of human space. Earth's warships, though momentarily still, were positioned to respond if necessary, ready to defend humanity against any retaliation. Cameron entered the room, her face drawn with the weight of the political storm brewing around them. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. Elias didn't look at her. "Now we wait." "For what?" "For them to come to us." Cameron's eyes narrowed. "You think they will?" Elias nodded, his expression unreadable. The galaxy will have to decide what it stands for now. The Treks are no longer a unified force. They will need new leadership, new direction. And Earth has already shown them what happens when you threaten us. Cameron stared at him, unsure of his words. And what do we do while they fight among themselves? Elias leaned back in his chair, a slight, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his lips. We stand firm. No one in this galaxy will forget that we were the ones who refused to bow. The final message. Later that day, the Galactic Forum reconvened, though it was far from the usual diplomatic proceedings. A new resolution was brought forward, a unanimous vote on the future of galactic warfare. The Alias Doctrine, a motion that would make it illegal for any empire to issue war ultimatums without an independent tribunal review, passed with overwhelming support. It wasn't just Earth's influence. The entire galaxy had witnessed the consequences of unchecked power. And now, they were trying to impose new rules that would prevent another Harker from ever rising again. As the forum discussions continued, Elias stood at the observation deck, watching as the stars stretched beyond Covenant Station. He was alone, but for the first time in what seemed like ages, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The galaxy had been irrevocably altered, and he had been the catalyst. His phone beeped softly, indicating an incoming message. Elias opened it, reading the brief message from Earth Command. Target eliminated. Forum shaken. No immediate retaliation. Trek's subcommanders in turmoil. Await further instructions. Stand by for debrief. Elias closed the message and, without a word, turned back to the stars. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. The legacy of Elias Voss. The galaxy would indeed remember Elias Voss, not as a diplomat, but as the man who shattered the myth of invincibility. His actions, bold and decisive, set a precedent that would be discussed for centuries to come. In every sector, in every system, whispers of his name spread. Some called him a murderer. Others a savior. But the one thing the galaxy could not ignore was the message he had sent. Humanity would never kneel to anyone, no matter how powerful. As the galaxy took its first steps toward a new era, one thing remained clear: silence, when wielded with purpose and clarity, was more powerful than any weapon. And Elias Voss had proven that.